want to help Ukraine resist Russia's war of unprovoked aggression. So in return for providing additional funding for Ukraine, we have to have significant and substantial reforms to our border policies.
President Biden has been drawing on his 50 years of foreign policy experience to walk a narrow tightrope over a wide chasm quite effectively. Now, that's in sharp contrast to the Republican Party over Ukraine. This is the party that, as we heard from Senator Cotton, likes to invoke Ronald Reagan, the man who helped liberate Ukraine from Russia.
That was some of the back and forth between Senator Tom Cotton and Congressman Jake Auchincloss from Fox News Sunday on the spending decisions facing lawmakers on Capitol Hill. For more on that, I'm joined by Florida Republican Congressman and member of the House Armed Services and Judiciary Committees, Matt Gaetz. Welcome, Congressman.
Thanks so much. I can't get the image out of my mind of President Biden on a tightrope after Jake Auchincloss's statement. Quite something.
Well, so there is an effort to get funding for Israel and Ukraine passed through Congress by Christmas. Should there be a border component included before lawmakers do that?
I believe all these issues should be addressed separately. However one feels about Ukraine or Israel or our own border, I think we should all responsibly acknowledge that they deserve their own dignity. The problem is most Republicans don't support continuing U.S. involvement in Ukraine. That becomes a political weight, and most Americans do support continuing to keep our close alliance with Israel well-resourced and on the right track. And so really what you hear from a number of folks in the Senate, Republican and Democrat, is that they want to use the goodwill Americans have toward Israel to drag along our continued involvement in Ukraine. As to the border provisions specifically, I'm increasingly concerned that on the border, the problem isn't money. We know exactly what to do to fix our border problem. It's the Remain in Mexico policies. It's the Title 42 authorities that President Trump had put in place. And it's the safe third country provisions that didn't have people trekking all the way into the United States for an asylum claim that they would never ultimately show up to in court. So I'm not for the Joe Biden $100 billion supplemental that will make things more challenging on the border and certainly won't make us safer abroad.
But do you worry about what happens to Ukraine and war in Europe if the United States backs off supporting the Ukrainians?
I'm more worried about a nuclear Russia engaging in some sort of escalatory accident that could draw the United States into literally a nuclear conflict than I am about broken down Russian tanks in the Donbas region. I don't believe that the American people want to pay another $100 billion to figure out which guy gets to run Crimea. We seem to almost be hitting a point there in the conflict where the Russian-speaking territories look very differently than what you see from the Western-leaning cities in Ukraine like Kyiv. So I'm far more concerned about what will happen to our people if we continue this tomfoolery.
All right, let's go to the Middle East. More hostages are being released, including today, including that precious 4-year-old American girl. How do you grade President Biden's performance when it comes to the Israel-Hamas conflict?
We're certainly glad that she is home, that any hostage that is released. But your last guest talked about how the Biden policies toward Iran have actually animated more violence from Hamas. So I would give Joe Biden an F, because he's allowing billions of dollars to be accessed and cash flow financed from Iran. We already know what Iran will do with that. They will use it to extend their malign influence. And it's worth noting that even the Biden administration's own inspector general at USAID is saying that a lot of this humanitarian assistance that Biden was just trumpeting from Nantucket actually ends up in the hands of Hamas. So let's not fund Hamas through Iran. Let's not feed Hamas through these USAID and other so-called humanitarian programs.
So what more should the president do in terms of pinching Iran and being more careful with the aid to Hamas? Is that your view?
Well, I don't know that we have a situation in Gaza where we can send aid that isn't controlled by Hamas. In a lot of ways, it's very similar to what we dealt with in Somalia in the 90s, where we wanted to ensure that people had food and medicine, but providing that provision was often scooped up by warlords. So I think the best thing to happen, frankly, for the people of Gaza, for the people of Israel and throughout the Middle East, is to see Hamas entirely defeated, allow the folks in Gaza to have some semblance of peace with without being terrorized by Hamas, and that'll likely lead to safer conditions than we've seen. And if we continue with this hostage trading diplomacy, as glad as we are to see those hostages home, I worry that that sets up a new paradigm where more hostages might be taken to buy time for more military operations that could actually lead to more death and destruction. So it's very perilous right now.
I mentioned you're on the Armed Services Committee. Congress has the power of the purse. The Pentagon has requested $114 million for spending on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, the most expensive request on this front that it has made. What's your reaction to that?
It is deeply troubling that we have some military leaders who want to build social justice warriors instead of warriors who are survivable and lethal and capable on the battlefield. We just saw in Minot, North Dakota, some military leaders admonish potential service members from even attending a conference with Turning Point USA, a conservative group that is certainly not out of the mainstream. And at the same time, they're saying you can't go to a conservative function. They are seeking all of this money for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And even in our National War College, we're seeing more and more books and pedagogy emerge that teach the value of embracing socialism as a geopolitical military strategy. I think we've got great service members. I think they're not being served well by some of the top leadership at the Pentagon. And at least I'm hopeful that when we called out the bad actions at Minot Air Force Base, they reversed course.
Congressman Matt Gaetz of the great state of Florida, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Mike.